Hello and welcome. My name is Alan. Today we are back with more ideas and opinions of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. from A Testament of Hope. So, let's continue where we were last episode. While the existence of a militant morale is immensely important, a fighting spirit that is insufficiently organized can become useless and even hazardous. To attempt a radical reform without adequate organization is like trying to sail a boat without a rudder. Yet any mature analysis of the recent events cannot fail to recognize the frailties of the Negro civil rights organizations. Prominent among the significant weaknesses of our organizations is their disunity and petty competition. When false rumors are circulated that some leaders have sold out to the power structure or are making opportunistic alliances with or another political party to gain individual advantage, the whole movement suffers. If a criticism is true, it is not destructive. It is a necessary attack on weakness. But often such criticisms uh, is a reflex response to gain organizational advantage. Too often, a genuine achievement has been falsely condemned as spurious and useless, and a victory has been turned into a disheartening defeat for the less informed. Our enemies will adequately deflate our accomplishment. We need not serve them as eager volunteers. Why are so many of our organizations too small, too beset with problems that consume disproportionate attention, or too dominated by sluggish passivity and smug complacency? For an answer, we must return to the nature of our original objectives. For much of the last decade, we took on the task of ending conditions that had long outlived their purpose. The desegregation of most public facilities, for example, was overdue for change. It was not necessary to build a widespread organization in order to win legislative victories. Sound effort to a single in a single city such as Birmingham or Selma produced situations that symbolized the evil everywhere and inflamed public opinion against it. Where the spotlight illuminated the evil, a legislative remedy has was soon obtained that applied everywhere. As a consequence, permanent, seasoned, and militant organizations did not arise out of compelling necessity. But corrective legislation requires organization to bring it to life. Laws only declare rights, they do not deliver them. The oppressed must take hold of the laws and transform them into effective mandates. Hence, the absence of powerful organization has limited the degree of application and the extent of practical success. We made easy gains and we built the kind of organizations that expect easy victory and rest upon them. It may seem curious to speak of easy victories when some have suffered and sacrificed so much. Yet, in candor and self criticism, it is necessary to acknowledge that the torturous job of organizing solidly and simultaneously in thousands of places was not a feature of our work. This is as true for the older civil rights organizations as for the newer ones. The older organizations have only acquired a mass base recently, and they still retain the flabby structures and policies that a pressureless situation made possible. Many civil rights organizations were born as specialists in agitation and dramatic projects. They attracted massive sympathy of struggle. The effect of their allies reflected their basic practices. Support waxed and waned, and people became conditioned to action in cries, but in crises, but inaction from day to day. We unconsciously patterned a crisis policy and program and summon support not for daily commitment, but for explosive events alone. Recognizing that no army can mobilize and demobilize and remain a fighting unit, we will have to build far flung, workmanlike, and experienced organizations in the future of the legislation we create and the agreements we forge are to be able are to be ably and zealously superintended. Moreover, to move to higher levels of progress, we will have to emerge from crises with more than agreements and laws. We shall have to have people tied together in a long term relationship instead of evanescent enthusiasts who lose their experience, spirit, and unity because they have no mechanism that directs them to new tasks. We have many assets to facilitate organization. Negroes are almost instinctively cohesive. We band together readily, and against white hostility, we have an intense and wholesome loyalty to each other. In some of the simplest relationships, we will protect a brother even at the cost of ourselves. We are loath to be witnesses against each other when the white man seeks to divide us. We are acutely conscious of the need and sharply sensitive to the importance of defending our own. Solidarity is a reality in Negro life as it always has been among the oppressed. Sometimes, unfortunately, it was misapplied when we confuse high status with high character. On the other hand, Negroes are capable of becoming competitive, carping, and in an expression of self hate, suspicious and intolerant of each other. A glaring weakness in Negro life is lack of sufficient mutual confidence and trust. Negro leaders suffer from this interplay of solidarity and divisiveness being either exalted excessively or grossly abused. But some of those leaders who suffer from lack of sustained support are not without weaknesses that give substance to criticism. The most serious is aloofness and absence of faith in their people. The white establishment is skilled in flattering and cultivating emerging leaders. It presses its own image on them, and finally, from imitation of manners, dress, and style of living, a deeper strain of corruption develops. This kind of Negro leader acquires the white man's contempt for the ordinary Negro. He is often more at home with the middle class white than he is among his own people. And frequently, his physical home is moved up and away from the ghetto. His language changes, his location changes, his income changes, and ultimately he changes from the representative of the Negro to the white man into the white man's representative to the Negro. The tragedy that is that too often he does not recognize what has happened to him. I learned a lesson many years ago from a report of two men who flew to Atlanta to confer with a civil rights leader at the airport before they could begin to talk. A porter sweeping the floor drew the local leader aside to talk to him about a matter that troubled him. After 15 minutes had passed, one of the visitors said bitterly to his companion, "I am just too busy for this kind of nonsense. I haven't come 1,000 miles to sit and wait while he talks to a porter." The other replied, "When the day comes that he stops having time to talk to a porter, on that day I will not have the time to come 1 mile to see him." When I heard of this story, I knew I was being told something I should never forget. We need organizations that are permeated uh, with mutual trust, incorruptibility, and militancy. Without this spirit, we may have members, but they will add up to zero. We need organizations that are responsible, efficient, and alert. We lack experience because ours is a history of disorganization, but we will prevail because we need for progress is stronger than the ignorance forced upon us. If we realize how indispensable is responsible militant organization to our struggle, we will create it as we manage to create underground railroads, protest groups, self help societies, and churches that have always been our refuge, our source of hope, and other source of action. In recent years, a multitude of civil rights programs have been elicited from the specialists and the scholars. To enhance their value and increase support for them, it is necessary that they be discussed and debated among the ordinary people affected by them. To facilitate study, I have grouped some or the more challenging proposals separately from an appendix to this volume. There is only one general proposal that I would like to examine here because it deals with the abolition of poverty within the nation and leads logically to my final discussion of poverty on an international scale. In the treatment of poverty nationally, one fact stands out. There are twice as many white poor as Negro poor in the United States. Therefore, I will not dwell on the experiences of poverty that derive from the racial discrimination, but will discuss the poverty that affects white and Negro alike. Up to recently, we have proceeded from a premise that poverty is a consequence of multiple evils: lack of education, restricting job opportunities, poor housing, which stultified home life and suppressed initiative, fragile family relationships, which distorted personality development. The logic of this approach suggested that each of those causes be attacked one by one Hence, a housing program to transform living conditions, improved educational facilities to furnish tools for better job opportunities, and family counseling to create better personal adjustments were designed. In combination, these measures were intended to remove the causes of poverty. While none of these remedies in itself is unsound, all will have fatal disadvantage, and programs have never proceeded on the coordinated basis or at a similar rates of development. Housing measures have fluctuated at the whims of legislative bodies. They have been piecemeal and pygmy. Educational reforms have been even more sluggish and entangled in bureaucratic stalling and economy dominated decisions. Family assistance stagnated in neglect, and when suddenly was discovered to be the central issue on the basis of hasty and superficial studies. At no time was a total, coordinated, and fully adequate program been conceived. As a consequence, fragmentary and spasmodic reforms have failed to reach down to the profoundest needs of the poor. In addition to the absence of coordination and sufficiency, the programs of the past all have another common failing. They are indirect. Each seeks to solve poverty by first solving something else. I am now convinced that the simplest approach will prove to be the most effective. The solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by now widely discussed measure, the guaranteed income. Earlier in this century, this proposal would have been greeted with ridicule and denunciation as destructive of initiative and responsibility. At the time, economic status was considered the measure of the individual's abilities and talents. In the simplistic thinking of the day, the absence of worldly goods indicated a want of industrious habits and moral fiber. We have come a long way in our understanding of human motivation and of the blind operation of our economic system. Now we realize that dislocations in the market operations of our economy and the prevalence of discrimination thrust people into idleness and bind them in constant or frequent unemployment against their will. The poor are less often dismissed from our conscience today as being branded as inferior and incompetent. We also know that no matter how dynamically and how dynamically the economy develops and expands, it does not eliminate all poverty. We have come to the point where we must make a non producer a consumer, or we will find ourselves drowning in a sea of consumer goods. We have so energetically mastered production that we now must give attention to distribution. Though there have been increases in purchasing power, they have lagged behind increases in production. Those at the lowest economic level, the poor white Negro, the aged and the at the lowest economic level, aged and chronically ill, are traditionally unorganized and therefore have little ability to force the necessary growth in their income. They stagnate or become even poorer in relation to the larger society. The problem indicates that our emphasis must be twofold. We must create full employment, or we must create incomes People must be made consumers by one method or the other. Once they are placed in this position, we need to be concerned that the potential of the individual is not wasted. New forms of work that enhance the social goodwill have to be devised for those for whom traditional jobs are not available. In 1879, Henry George anticipated this state of affairs when he wrote in Progress and Poverty, "The fact is that the work which improves the condition of mankind, the work which extends knowledge and increases power and enriches literature and elevates thought, is not done to secure a living. It is not the work of slaves driven to their task either by the lash of the master or by animal necessities. It is the work of men who perform it for their own sake, and not that they may get more to eat or drink, or wear or display. In a state of society where want is abolished, work of this sort should be enormously increased. We are likely to find that the problems of housing and education, instead of preceding the elimination of poverty, will themselves be affected if poverty is first abolished. The poor, transformed into purchasers, will do a great deal on their own to alter housing decay. Negroes who have a double disability will have a greater effect on discrimination when they have the additional weapon of cash to use in their struggle. Beyond these advantages, a host of positive psychological changes inevitably will result from widespread economic security. The dignity of the individual will flourish, and the decisions concerning his life are in his own hands when he has the assurance that his income is stable and certain, and when he knows that he has the means to seek self improvement. Personal conflicts between husband, wife, and children will diminish when the unjust measurement of human worth on a scale of dollars is eliminated. Two conditions are indispensable if we are to ensure that the guaranteed income operates at a consistently progressive measure. First, it must be pegged to the median income of society, not the lowest levels of income. To guarantee an income at the floor would simply perpetuate welfare standards and freeze into the society poverty conditions. Second, the guaranteed income must be dynamic. It must automatically increase as the total social income grows. Were it permitted to remain static under growth conditions, the recipients would suffer a relative decline. If periodic reviews disclose that the whole national income has risen, then the guaranteed income would have to be adjusted upward by the same percentage. Without these safeguards, a creeping retrogression would occur, nullifying the gains of security and stability. This proposal is not civil rights in the sense that that term is currently used. The program would benefit all the poor, including the two-thirds of them that are white. I hope that both Negro and white will act in coalition to effect this change, because their combined strength will be necessary to overcome the fierce opposition we must realistically anticipate. Our nation's adjustment to a new mode of thinking will be facilitated if we realize that for nearly 40 years, two groups in our society have already been enjoying a guaranteed income. Indeed, it is a symptom of our confused social values that these two groups turn out to be the richest and the poorest. The wealthy who own securities have always had an assured income, and their polar opposite, the relief client, has been guaranteed an income, however minuscule, through welfare benefits. John Kenneth Galbraith has estimated that $20 billion a year would affect a guaranteed income, which he describes as not much more than we will spend the next fiscal year to rescue freedom and democracy and religious liberty as these are defined by experts in Vietnam. The contemporary tendency of our society is to base our distribution on scarcity, which has vanished, and to compress our abundance into the overfed mouths of the middle and upper classes until they gag with superfluidity. If democracy is to have breadth of meaning, it is necessary to adjust this inequity. It is not only moral, it is also intelligent. We are wasting and degrading human life by clinging to archaic thinking. The curse of poverty has no justification in our age. It is socially as cruel and blind as the practice of cannibalism at the dawn of civilization, when men ate each other because they had not yet learned to take food from the soil or to consume the abundant animal life around them. The time has come for us to civilize ourselves by the total, direct, and immediate abolition of poverty. So, yeah, Dr. King talking about there is a need to end poverty, which does so much damage to society as a whole. To no matter what race you are, it still affects the poor, the middle, the working class. And if it is resolved, it fixes a lot of issues. Because it also takes into effect everything else that is happening. One of the things he is recommending is a guaranteed income. This is something we've seen come back to the surface with Andrew Yang. He's like, guaranteed income, which probably was the best um, suggestion from his run as president. I agree that, yes, the country does need a guaranteed income. Because people shouldn't struggle because the rich are getting richer and pricing the things out of control. We need a guaranteed income to guarantee that everybody will have the ability to be human, to have a living lifestyle. You know, home, food, clothing, and all the other necessities of life. And this is also where we come into some of the information that Dr. King was considered a little socialist in his views. Because he was like, we can't depend on the rich to end poverty. It must be done to help everyone. And if we rise from the bottom up instead of the top down, America will grow. But yeah, that's just what I wanted. That'll be the end of this episode. As always, Educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, later.